Hey everybody, just before we get started with this episode, I just want to let you know that we're running a contest on Instagram. Yes, that's right, for a chance to win some Time Spiraled Remastered cards. All you need to do to win is go on Instagram, type General Warfare MTG, like the contest photo, and comment 333 for a chance to win. The contest closes on April 13th, and we will be picking a winner then, so don't forget to enter for a chance to win some cool prizes. Hey everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Brewing with 50 Bucks. I'm Stefan, coming to you from the soon-to-be former General Warfare headquarters. Yeah, it's not too long now until the move, so this may be the last video I do in this apartment. And on a personal note, I know for a fact that I'm gonna miss this place. I've spent the last 4 years really here, and well, it's starting to sink in a little bit. The fact that I'm not gonna be in this little apartment anymore. It's slowly sinking in, but honestly, the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be transitioning over to a bigger place, and trust me when I say it's a lot nicer. Trust me when I say that. With that being said, it's coming to the 1 year mark since Ikoria was released onto us. I'm not going to lie with you guys, it's still a really cool set. Like, it's given us some cool cards, it's given us the companion mechanic, and it's also given us the Godzilla line of alternates. So what more can you ask for from a set that's all about giant mutant monsters? Oh, I kind of gave it away, didn't I? This video, however, is going to focus on one main mechanic, Mutate. So Mutate is not something new. We've seen this mechanic back in Unsanctioned. This is not Commander legal set. This is just kind of a jokey, fun little set to draft and play just for fun with your friends. However, Unsanctioned has unequivocally given us the startings and the, well, inception of the new mechanic, Mutate. So from there, Ikoria kind of tinkered and kind of mastered it a little bit better, let's just say. So with that, trying to narrow down a commander really to showcase Mutate in all its glory has been really hard, especially when there's not a lot of, well, classify as the best for Mutate. I'll be quite honest with you. So in order to showcase Mutate at its finest, I decided to get a little creative here. And so for today's video, we're going to be looking at Niv Mizzet Reborn with the companion Jegantha the Wellspring. Having a companion has a lot of benefits in so many ways, and I'll explain in the description of our commander and our companion. So Niv Mizzet Reborn is a 6/6 for WUBRG, so white, blue, black, red, and green for a legendary dragon avatar with flying, and whenever Niv Mizzet Reborn enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each color pair, choose a card that's exactly those colors from among them. Put the chosen cards into your hands and the rest on the bottom of your library in any random order. And Jegantha the Wellspring is a 5/5 for 4 and a mixture of either red or green. Legendary Elemental Elk with Companion. Companion is no cards in your starting deck has more than one of the same mana symbols in the mana cost. And you can tap Jegantha to add WUBRG. This mana cannot be spent on any generic mana cost. For Niv Mizzet, the key word here is color pair. So with this, we cannot go and grab any 3-color cards, so we must get a 2-color pair instead. With Niv Mizzet, it allows us to dig for better solutions to our problematic opponents, giving us more fuel to put into our hands, and Jegantha is there to add WUBRG to allow Niv Mizzet to be cast on the rotation of the next turn, and you're gonna have free mana to play any Mutate card you have in your hand, given that Jegantha lives through the rotation. As always, we're working with a $50 budget, where basic lands do not count for the total deck price, yet the price of the commander and the companion do count. There is some wiggle room to work with in the budget, but we'll explore that avenue when it comes up. We have 6 main categories in this video, so let's get straight into the main theme of this deck: mutations. It's everything we need to make our own Frankenstein monster. Starting off, we have Auspicious Starx. For mutate 5 and green, whenever it mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile X permanent cards, where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. Put those permanent cards onto the battlefield. So, one extra key factor is the ability mutate stacks over time. So, however many times you mutate the creature, that many times the ability triggers. So, for this, X meaning you can mutate this card however many times, and however many times Niv Mizzet gets mutated, Auspicious Starx mutated on top of it, you get to exile cards off the top of the library until you exile X permanents, where basically you get to put them onto the battlefield afterwards. If you're mutating at least 5 times, you're exiling cards until you hit 5 permanents, and from there you get to put them onto the field. Now, they could be other mutate cards, or they could be other valuable cards, which we'll get into later. The next one is Boneyard Lurker, and whenever it mutates, you return a target permanent card from your graveyard to the hand. So this is effectively a repeatable Eternal Witness for 1 more, and you basically get to do this every single time you mutate the card. So anytime a creature or a permanent is put in your graveyard, whenever you mutate, you get to put that permanent back into your hand. Next, we have Brokos, Apex of Forever. So you can mutate Brokos from the graveyard anytime you want. And whenever Brokos goes to the graveyard, you have Niv Mizzet come back onto the battlefield. You get to use Brokos and you get to stack the mutate triggers, especially the ones that have X in the ability, like Auspicious Starx. Next, you have Cavern Whisper. Whenever it mutates, each opponent discards a card. So you have the stack with multiple mutate effects, and you can just completely deaden somebody's hand, or you can completely nullify anybody from having a hand. I should say any opponent from having a hand. Next, we have Chittering Harvester. Whenever it mutates, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So this ability is more effective for decks that aren't very wide decks. So token strategies, this will not affect at all. However, if you have an opponent who is solely focused on having 1 creature on the field at all times, this is definitely a card to mutate, especially since having our commander cost more and more each time they have to sacrifice it. They're not going to play it after maybe 2 or 3 times of this mutate card going on the field, because that's at least 4 or 6 more mana they have to pay to cast their commander. Next, we have Cub Warden. Whenever it mutates, create 2 1/1 white cat creature tokens with lifelink. So you stack mutates, you get a lot of cats with lifelink, you get the life back from however much your opponents have attacked you for. But for the most part, you're going to be controlling the battlefield with how much mutate you have on Niv Mizzet at a time. So with this, you're going to be creating a little army of white cats. Next, we have Dreamtail Heron. So whenever it mutates, you draw a card. So stack mutate abilities, you get to draw many cards into your hand. Next, we have Gem Razor. Whenever it mutates, you destroy a target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. This is fantastic whether or not you're stacking mutate cards, because you effectively get to remove problematic enchantments or problematic artifacts, especially when you're stacking mutate abilities. So you have Gem Razor come in mutated, and then you're playing Cub Warden or you're playing Cavern Whisperer. From there, Gem Razor will trigger, they mutate onto Niv Mizzet, and then for each one of those, you get to destroy another artifact or another enchantment an opponent controls. So you can't even target your own enchantments or your own artifacts, which is a bonus. Next, we have Glowstone Recluse. So whenever it mutates, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So whenever you mutate this onto Niv Mizzet, every time you mutate, you stack mutate abilities. Each time you're putting 2 +1/+1 counters on Niv Mizzet, making Niv Mizzet bigger, and you're making Niv Mizzet much scarier for your opponents to handle, especially with flying, because it's effective evasion for land creatures. Next, we have Huntmaster Liger. Whenever it mutates, other creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of times this creature is mutated. For the most part, you're not going to be using the mutate ability on it, because there's not going to be a lot of other creatures you're going to see, unless you have Huntmaster Liger and Cub Warden on the field, where Cub Warden will already have given you enough cats, and Huntmaster will effectively give the cats +X/+X. However, for most cases, you're just going to be using the mutates just to stack it on top of Niv Mizzet and get other abilities off it. Next, we have Illuna. Apex of Wishes. Whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land permanent card. You put that card onto the battlefield or in your hand. So you have the choice here. You get to put it on the battlefield, whether it's a strong creature or something really strong that you need in the moment, or you get to put this in your hand to very much offset your opponents as to what you're going to be doing. Next, we have Insatiable Hemophage. Whenever this creature mutates, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of times this creature is mutated. This is a game-ending card, especially when you have it mutated on top of Niv Mizzet. For however many times you mutate, you basically get the life back from how many times it mutates, and your opponents are losing life. Especially when this hits at least like higher numbers, like 7, 9, 10, 11 times that it's been mutated, you're gaining so much life and your opponents are losing so much life that you're going to already be on the throne, meaning you're going to be at so much life and you're going to have all the board presence. Next, we have Lord Dracus. Whenever this mutates, you return a target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So you get to return a counter spell or a removal spell from your graveyard to your hand. You get to keep playing that and keep waving it over your opponent's heads. That way, they are not going to be able to play anything for the longest time, as long as you have Lord Dracus mutated on top of Niv. And each stacking mutate, you get to bring another one back. Next, we have Migratory Greyhorn. Whenever it mutates, you search your library for a basic land and put it into the battlefield tapped. So for this, you get to thin your deck out by getting a basic land onto the battlefield, and each time you mutate, you get to thin your deck even further. There's basically 24 basic lands in the deck, so with Migratory Greyhorn, you're going to be thinning your deck quite a bit because you're going to be getting every single basic out of your deck. Next, we have Necropanther. Whenever this creature mutates, you return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. There's quite a few converted mana cost 3 or less creatures in this deck. Basically, you get to return them onto the battlefield. They won't be mutated. You can't mutate them once they're on the battlefield. However, you still get a lot of blockers and you still get some advantage on the battlefield and more mutate bodies to put on. Next, we have Nethroi, Apex of Death. Whenever it mutates, you return any number of target creature cards with total power 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This, I remember, being one of the more looked at mutate cards when the set was released about a year ago. With that, basically, you have a giant advantage here. So whenever it mutates, you get to return a crap ton of value from your graveyard to the battlefield. Whenever it mutates, you get to put power 10 or less. You can get at least 3 cards from your graveyard to the battlefield whenever Nethroi or Niv with Nethroi mutated gets to mutate. It's incredibly valuable, it's incredibly scary, and I just love it nonetheless. Next, we have Parcel Beast. This one is an effective one. With its mutate, you get to tap 1 and tap it to look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you get to put it on the battlefield. If you don't put the card on the battlefield, you put it into your hand. So this is more effective as a mutate ability to stack with the rest of your mutate cards. You get the knowledge of getting that card into your hand, especially at the end of your opponent's turn before yours. You basically look at the top card, and if you have a land, you put on the battlefield, extra mana for your next turn, or you get to put another card into your hand. What better? Next, we have Polywog Symbiote. Although not a mutate card, this actually helps with mutate costs. So each creature spell you cast costs 1 less to cast if it has mutate. Whenever you cast a creature spell, if it has mutate, you draw a card and then discard a card. Effectively, this is just a rummage card, but it also lowers the cost of your mutate cards. It doesn't lower the mutate cost, it just lowers the converted mana cost of the card. Next, you have Porcup, and it's another one like Parcel Beast, where you get to mutate and you get to tap it. But with this one, this creature deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. So this can also be a effective game-winning creature, or mutate, I should say. So if you have at least like a high number, like 7, 9, 10, 11 times this is mutated, you get to tap Niv, and you get to deal 11 damage basically to an opponent right off the bat, and it's That's at least a fourth of their life if you're playing with multiple people, or a third of their life if you're playing 1v1, which is very scary. Even scarier when you're playing 1v1. You're dealing a third of their damage. But nonetheless, you get to deal that damage, and you're in a much more effective space than you were the turn before. Next, we have Pouncing Shore Shark, which is probably one of my favorite mutate cards in this set. And it has mutate, flash, and whenever it mutates, you get to return a target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. The fact that it has flash is one of the reasons why I love this card. If you've seen any other Brewing with $50 cards, you know how much I love flash cards. Especially having the ability to play it on somebody else's turn is much more effective than just having to hard cast it on your own turn. Not only that, but you get to return a creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So if you're about to die from a one-hit creature, you basically get to play Pouncing Shore Shark, mutate it, and then return it to its owner's hand, nullifying the attack, and you basically get to live another turn. And Pouncing Shore Shark, every time you mutate, basically the effect goes off and you get to keep returning creatures to their opponent's hands. Next, we have Snapdax, Apex of the Hunt. Whenever this creature mutates, it deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, and you gain 4 life. Now, this is not my favorite card because it has a set amount of damage. Basically, set damage means it only deals a set amount of damage. This time it's only 4, and it doesn't target players. I was kind of reluctant putting this in the deck itself, but every time it mutates, it deals 4 damage to a creature. It's kind of good, especially if you're doing multiple iterations. That way you can clear a board out for whatever you're mutating on the board, or you just clear a board for Niv Mizzet to get through and swing for big, large, massive, huge. Next, we have Souvenir Snatcher. Whenever this creature mutates, you gain control of target non-creature artifact. So you can basically effectively steal everybody's ramp, or their big, scary artifacts if you wish. Every time you mutate, you steal something. Every time you mutate, you steal an opponent's ramp, or a rock, or a signet, or just, I don't know, whatever they have on the field that's not a creature artifact. Basically, you have free reign and carte blanche to steal it. Next, we have Trumpeting Gnar. Whenever this creature mutates, you create a 3/3 green beast token. Effectively, you get to poop out other tokens, especially the same like how Cub Warden poops out 2 1/1 white cats. This one poops out 3/3 green beast tokens. Next, we have Vardok, Apex of Thunder. Whenever this creature mutates, you may cast target non-creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. This is one of my favorite mutate cards, 1 and 2. This was the commander I considered for the deck ultimately. However, Niv Mizzet gave it a better run for its money. Yet I want to keep Vardok in this deck because it is so powerful, especially when you mutate a card, you get to play whatever removal spell, whatever valuable spell you have. It's so bad for your opponents, but it's so good for you. That's why I love this card so much. And last is Vulpikit. And whenever it mutates, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Same like Glowstone Recluse, except it's only 1 +1/+1 counter, but stack it with the Recluse, you get at least 3 +1/+1 counters every single time you mutate a card onto Niv Mizzet. Next, we're heading into our value cards. We want some extra pizzazz for playing cards and inevitably getting cards. So first we have Abzan Ascendancy. For whenever it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So the reason I added this in the deck is basically to get that +1/+1 counter, and whenever Niv Mizzet dies, with the new commander rule that came out last year, whenever it dies, it technically, the ability still works when you put it into the command zone. That way you still get the white spirit. However, it's mostly for the +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Next, we have Back for More. This is a return a target creature card from your graveyard, and when you do, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Now, you can definitely put Niv Mizzet in the graveyard, and you can play this card right afterwards to get Niv Mizzet back on the field, stack the trigger to have Niv Mizzet fight and kill whatever creature is harming you at that point. And the ability of Niv Mizzet coming into the battlefield will trigger. So that way you're getting so much more value on top of it just coming back from your graveyard. Next, we have Death's Oasis. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, then return a creature card with lesser converted mana cost than the creature that died from your graveyard to your hand. And 1 and sacrifice the Death Oasis, you gain life equal to the greatest converted mana cost among creatures you control. So with this, you basically get to mill, and you get to return a creature card with lesser converted mana cost into your hand. So if a Throy dies, you get to mill 2 and you get to return something that costs less than 5. Or if Niv Mizzet dies, the same thing. You're effectively Tassigurring a card, but it's only limited to a creature. And you get to sacrifice it and gain life equal to the greatest converted mana cost. So at the very minimum, with Niv Mizzet, you're gonna gain 5 life. At the very most, you're gonna gain 6 life. Next, we have Fact or Fiction. It is a blue staple, and it is a good card to put in any deck that has blue in it. You get to reveal the top 5 cards and have an opponent choose the piles. You get to put those cards in, and you choose the pile. It's just fantastic to have in any deck that has blue in it. It's a staple, and any deck that's not running this card and that has blue, what are you doing? Next, we have Grizzly Salvage. You get to reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature or land card from among them into your hand and put the rest into your graveyard. Now, effectively, the majority of the deck is either lands or creatures with mutate. So basically, you're going to be hitting one or the other within those 5 cards most of the time. With that, you get to put 1 card with mutate. Most of the time, it'll be mutate. There are a couple other cards that don't have mutate in this deck. However, you get to put 1 in your hand, and then you get more fodder for Niv to mutate on top of. Next, we have Primal Empathy. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card with you control the creature with the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield. Otherwise, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. At the very minimum, you're putting a +1/+1 counter on Niv Mizzet. At the very best, you're drawing a card on your upkeep. So you're drawing 2 cards effectively on your turn. Next, we have Return of the Wild Speaker. This is a fantastic card to play in any deck that has green. You get to draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. There are definitely no human creatures in this deck. Most of the time, you're going to be using the first ability to draw at least 6, 7, 8 cards right off the bat. The second ability is also great if you want to kill somebody with commander damage. Most of the time, you're going to be using the first ability to get all that card advantage. Next, you have Season of Growth. You've seen this card in my Livio and Kodama deck, my very first Brewing with $50 deck. A link on the top right of your screen. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you scry 1. And whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, you draw a card. You 2-for-1 this, you basically get to 2-for-1 Season of Growth with Niv Mizzet. Since you are technically casting your creatures with mutate, you basically get to target a creature. So whenever it enters the battlefield, you're technically casting this, you get to draw a card, and I do believe you get the scry ability on top of it as well. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I'm pretty sure you get the scry as well. Next, we have Temur Ascendancy. Creatures you control have haste, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you get to draw a card, or you may draw a card. A majority of these cards are power 4 or greater, so you're drawing a card no matter what. Even with Niv Mizzet, you're drawing a card whenever he comes into play, and the fact that your creatures have haste is very, very good as well. And last, we have Titan's Nest. At the beginning of your upkeep, you look at the top card of your library, you could put that card into your graveyard, and you get to exile a card from your graveyard, add 1 colorless. You spend this mana only to cast a color spell without X in its mana cost. So effectively, you get to cast, no, you don't get to cast creatures with this. Color. So effectively, you get to pay for commander tax with Titan's Nest. So you get to exile cards from your graveyard, pay for commander's tax, and get Niv Mizzet back onto the battlefield. Next, we go to our removal spells. Anything our opponents can do, we need to get rid of. With this, we start with Bant Charm. So this is a 3-for-1 basically. You get to choose either to destroy an artifact, you get to put a target creature on the bottom of its owner's library, or you get to counter a target instant spell. This also counts for our counter spells, and this counts for our removal since you get to destroy an artifact, which most of the time is very valuable. since if you want to get rid of somebody's ramp, you can do that and stall them out for a turn or two. Next, we have Barrier Breach. You get to exile up to 3 target enchantments and cycle 2. So exiling enchantments are really good, especially if you're up against an enchantress deck that is very scary. You get to exile them so they don't get them back. And the fact that his has cycle is always great, since you know my love for cycle cards. You get to discard it to get a new card, a fresh card in hand. Next, we have Beast Within, which is always an amazing card and a staple in decks that run green in it. If you don't have this deck and you're running green, you should be ashamed. Next, we have D-Spark, a card from War of the Spark, which has become a pet card for me anytime I'm running a white and black deck. I always put this in. You get to exile a target permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. It's extremely good. And for 2 mana, exile a permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. So good. Next, we have Dune Blast. Choose up to 1 creature and you destroy the rest. Most to all the time, aka all the time. You're choosing Niv Mizzet or whatever creature you have all your mutates on. You destroy each other creature on the field. Next, we have Mortify. You destroy a target creature or enchantment. Basic, simple. It's a staple in budget. Next, we have Mythos of Nithroi. When you get to destroy target non-land permanent if it's a creature, or if white and green was spent to its cast. So you either get to destroy a creature if you just pay black and not the other color requirements, or if you pay white, green, and black, you get to destroy a target non-land permanent, which effective, very effective. It's a bit limited with the color choice, but it's still an effective way of removing something. Next, you have Putrefy. It's the same thing like Mortifying, except you get to destroy target artifact instead of enchantment. And the colors are different. Instead of black-white, you have black-green. And lastly, we are running Swords to Plowshare. Yes, Swords to Plowshare instead of Path to Exile, because Swords in this deck, not because I got lazy and took it and replaced it for Path. Swords is just better, I find. You get to exile and its controller gains life equal to its power. Debatable, you can argue this in the comments section, but I find Swords to Plowshare effectively better than Path to Exile. Next, we have our counter spells. Anything that we can do to disrupt our opponents is worth doing. So first, we have Arcane Denial. You get to counter target spell, and its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next upkeep. And you get to draw at the beginning of the next upkeep as well. So you counter a spell, you draw a card, and your opponent draws 2. If it's a small offset for you to have 1 card over your opponents to have 2 cards over your 1 card, it's still effective to counter a target spell. Next, we have Counter Squall, which is you get to counter target non-creature spell, and its controller loses 2 life. Effective, especially for 2 mana. Next, we have Dovin's Veto, which this spell can't be countered, and you counter target non-creature spell. Very effective, and it cannot be countered, which is so much better. Next, we have Ionize, which you get to counter a target spell, and Ionize deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. So effectively you counter it and you just basically get to slap somebody on the wrist, being like, no, bad. And finally, we're running Negate. A simple, effective, and staple card, counter target non-creature spell. And we have a couple of extra cards that we're running in this deck. First, we're running Predatory Impetus. You either enchant Niv Mizzet, or you get to enchant another creature of your opponent, and it gets +3/+3, must be blocked if able, and is goaded. So goaded means it attacks each combat if able, and attacks a player other than you if able. If you're playing this in a multiplayer game, it is much more effective than if you're playing this 1v1. However, if you're playing this 1v1, you get to put this on Niv or another creature you're playing with. But effectively, +3/+3 is nothing to scoff at. +3/+3 can go a long way, and it's still very scary if to have a 9/9 instead of a 6/6. Next, we're running Growth Spiral. You draw a card, and you can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So effectively draw and ramp on top of it. And we're running Lifecrafter's Bestiary. At your upkeep, you scry 1, and whenever you cast a creature spell, you may pay green. If you do, draw a card. Effective, and it's good value on top of it. And lastly, our 1 tutor of the deck is Signal of the Clans. So you get to search your library for 3 creature cards and reveal them. If you reveal 3 cards with different names, which in Commander is cards with different names, you choose one of them at random and put that card into your hand, and you shuffle the rest into your library. So you're effectively tutoring for 1 at random. You're gambling basically on whatever creature you get but you choose 3 cards with mutate, and effectively you get to get one of them at least into your hand. You don't know which one it'll be, but that's why you're taking a gamble here. Next, we have our ramp spells. It's what we need to get us to Value Town. First, we're running Bonder's Ornament. You get to tap and add 1 mana of any color, and 4 and tap it. Each player who controls a permanent named Bonder's Ornament draws a card. It's effectively ramp and draw all on 1 card. Next, we have Feyburrow Elder. With Vigilance, Feyburrow Elder gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control, and for each color among permanents you control, you add 1 mana of that color. With Niv Mizzet out on the field, this taps for 5, and this becomes a 5/5 in and of itself with Vigilance. Super scary. It's starting to become a very good staple card, especially as a little card from Throne of Eldraine. And next we have Jegantha Crystal, Ketria Crystal, Rogrin Crystal, Savai Crystal, and Zagoth Crystal. All the crystals basically that generate 3 colors. You're going to need some form of ramp, and I decided to choose these crystals instead of going the simple guild clue stones and all that. This just seems much more effective, and you're gonna get all your mana a lot faster with these crystals instead of just having your regular signets, your regular clue stones, and such. Next, we're running Kendama's Reach, where you get to search your library for up to 2 basic lands and put 1 onto the battlefield and 1 into your hand. Effective, staple, you know what it is. Then we have Tatiova Benthic Druid, which is the most expensive card in this deck, but it is effective. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and draw a card. It's really good, and the main reason why it's in this deck is anytime you're putting down a land, you're gaining a life, you're drawing a card, you're effectively gaining value off a land drop. And last, we're running Tome of the Guild Pack. So whenever you cast a multicolored spell, you draw a card and you add 1 mana of any color. So effectively, almost every single card in this deck is a multicolored card. So most of the time you're going to be drawing cards off Tome of the Guild Pack, and you get to use it for mana as well. And lastly, we're getting to our lands, the fuel to our deck. We're running 36 lands overall, starting off with Blighted Woodland. You know how much I love this card. It's tap for a colorless, 3 and a green, tap it and sack it to search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Next, we're running Command Tower. You get to add 1 mana of any color of your commander's color identity, so any color you desire except colorless. You're running Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, our mini land tutors, basically to thin out the deck. We're running Exotic Orchard. You add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls can produce. Effectively, we're running a 5-color deck, so this is much more valuable in a 5-color deck than it would be in, let's just say, 2 or 3, or even 4. Next, we're running Myriad Landscape, which effectively is Blighted Woodland, but it comes into play tapped, and you tap 2 and sacrifice it to get the 2 basic lands onto the battlefield. Then we're running 5 forests, 8 islands, 4 mountains, 6 plains, and 7 swamps. And that's how you build a Frankenstein dragon with a colorful elk friend. From our $50 budget, our total for this deck is, believe it or not, $51.58. I'm going to consider this within the budget since $1.50 doesn't really break the bank and is pretty forgivable in terms of pricing. And of course, if you wish to add other more expensive cards in this deck, like Smothering Tithe, like Maelstrom Nexus, and Assassin's Trophy, you're more than welcome to do so. This is my $50 brew for a fun-themed commander, but those would be some suggestions I would encourage you to put in this deck. And that's gonna be it for today's video. What do you guys think of today's brew? Are there any cards you think that I'm missing in this deck? Please let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you found enjoyment from this video, consider giving this video a like and subbing to the channel. That way you know when a new video is gonna come out, especially if you hit that little bell icon. That really tells you everything. I post every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and every video has a premiere on top of it, so set your clocks, 11 a.m. Fridays Eastern Standard Time. Also, don't forget, I'm running a little contest on my Instagram page. If you want to win some Time Spiraled Remastered cards for free, just go to the Instagram page, you find the contest photo, you give it a like, and you comment 333, and that opens your chance to win some free cards. Contest closes on April 13th. I'll be choosing a winner then. And while you're at it, why don't you give the rest of the social medias a follow and a like. That's the way you're gonna be keeping up to date with all the future video ideas and up to date on everything for General Warfare. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you either next Friday or the Friday after, depending on how much stress I'm under after the move. Until then, cheers everybody.